Hi, everyone, and welcome to Deep Geek Live. This is the second in a sort of two-part series about the Dance of the Dragons. Last week, I looked at the build-up to the Dance of the Dragons. Today, I'm looking at the actual dance itself. Now, what I try to do at the beginning of every live stream is a little bit of an update on what's been happening out in the wider world. Not huge amounts in terms of fantasy news this week, although tomorrow couple of things that I will definitely be watching. I won't be covering on this channel, but I'm a fan anyway. Skywalker and also Stranger Things Season 4 will be happening. So if either of those work for you, they are dropping, or at least the first couple of episodes are dropping tomorrow. But let's get straight into what we're talking about today. Today we're talking about the Dance of the Dragons, which is going to be the main focus of House of the Dragon. As I said last week, Season 1 of House of the Dragon is the build-up. That we don't know exactly where they're going to be drawing the end line, but it's basically when war happens. Today, we're going to be talking about the dance as a whole, which is a Targaryen civil war and is going to cover us all the way through however many seasons they do. So that's what we're going to cover. I've got a lot of questions from my patrons that I will be working my way through. I'll try and pick up as many questions from the chat as we can, but I wanted to start with a sort of an overview. This is the story that we get in Fire and Blood. Now, this isn't a long story. This is covering somewhere between 100 and 200 pages, depending on where you put the beginning and end points. But this is definitely the center point of this part of the Targaryen rule. And the way that they're branding this in terms of the TV show is that this is the beginning of the end of the Targaryen rule. And I think that that's the point that we need to make to start with, is that with a historical lens, as far as Westeros is concerned, we should look at this and say, this is the moment when the narrative shifted from the Targaryens are in control and will always be in control with more dragons and more power, to the Targaryens are holding on to power because of their historical precedent of being kings, and the dragons are gone. This is the turning point. So what we get here is the death of the dragons and the death of the Targaryens. There were lots of Targaryens at the beginning of the dance. By the end of the dance, not very many at all. So we went from a hugely strong family to a still strong family, but not anywhere near as powerful as they used to be. Okay, so let's get into a bit of the overview of what actually happened in the dance. And it is, having said that, it's not that long, it is quite detailed. So what I would say at this stage, don't worry too much about the details. Think about the flow of this story. The flow of this story is, we had all the build up to create two camps, and this is not rare in the world of the Targaryens. We had two camps, two rivals for the throne, and they both wanted to take it by force, and they both thought that their candidate was the best candidate. We may have views on who the actual best candidate was, but they both justified it to themselves, which is critical in terms of George R. R. Martin's writing. He is very much a fan of the idea of everyone is a hero in their own story. The Greens, as well as the Blacks, thought that they were fighting on the side of peace and righteousness and justice. That is part of what created this. Neither of them thought, hey, here's a cheeky way we can just sneak our person onto the throne. Both of them thought that they had the best candidate who should have the Iron Throne. So where we left it last time was, we have the declaration that Aegon II, Alicent's child, Alicent's oldest son, with the old king Viserys, they crowned him king in King's Landing. The Blacks, Rhaenyra and co, hear about this. We get the Black Council over there. They crown Rhaenyra queen. So we immediately have two rivals who are both not only just claiming the throne, but actually they've had their own coronations. They are claiming that they are the ruler already. So what happens then? Well, first of all, we have a period of what is a sort of a phony war, to be honest. Not huge amounts of war and bloodshed and battle happens. It's quite restricted. There's a lot of diplomatic toing and froing, but the Blacks start out with realizing, first of all, they don't have much. They're based on the islands. They're based on Dragonstone. They're based on Driftmark. They don't have much of a base on mainland Westeros. So they have to sort that out. So Daemon goes over and takes Harrenhal and the Riverlands as a whole. This will become more important later on because Harrenhal, in Game of Thrones, Harrenhal was interesting and seems quite cool, but here this is central to strategy. This is the biggest castle. This is the most central place in the entire Seven Kingdoms. Anyway, the Blacks also send out people around and ravens to try and gather support from people. The crucial things that happen is that Jacaerys goes north. He gets the support of the north. They will arrive, but later on. It takes a long time for the north to gather, particularly with winter coming. It takes a long time for the north to call the banners and then head south. So they will not really appear in force until much later in the story. Then Lucerys goes to Storm's End to try and get the Baratheon support. The Baratheons were important then, as they are in A Song of Ice and Fire, and are married into the family at various points as well. So they're close, they're powerful. There he meets Aemond, and there's a battle. The battle over Shipbreaker Bay. The two fight, and the first real casualty of the war happens, which is Lucerys. He dies, and a dragon dies, and suddenly the Blacks need revenge. And so then we have Blood and Cheese. I think Blood and Cheese is going to be the red wedding of this, probably season 2 of the TV show. It's going to be hugely traumatic, so I'm not going to spoil it if you don't know the story, but it ends with another death, and suddenly both sides have got a blood grievance going on. What happens then is that the Greens, who had thought that they'd launched this wonderful coup, realize actually it's not going to plan. Otto Hightower had been the hand of the king, but his strategy was diplomacy. His strategy was writing out, seeking alliances with far-flung peoples, which do come through in time, to be fair to Otto, but it doesn't give them the quick win they are wanting. He gets replaced as hand by Criston Cole. Criston Cole is a lot more forthright. He's a lot more on the front foot. He wants to just go out and win battles. So we have the second, I suppose, dragon battle, which is the Battle of Rook's Rest, which is crucial because Rhaenys is killed. Rhaenys is there over on Team Black. She was the queen who never was. And also Aegon II was injured very, very badly. And this is, remember, Team Black's candidate for the crown. And I think when you just read through Fire and Blood for the first time, you often skate over this, but he was traumatized and badly hurt. And for most of the rest of the Dance of the Dragons, he is high on milk of the poppy. He is staying out of the action. He's not actually leading affairs. It's the other people in his team who are leading things. And yet suddenly at the end, spoilers, at the end, he becomes king. And it's like, who is this person? And this person is bitter and twisted and addled by drugs and a lot of other things. So that the Battle of Rook's Rest is very important. Then the Blacks go, well, this is still in balance. It remains in balance most of the way through this story. Sometimes one side has the upper hand, sometimes the other side has the upper hand. But the Blacks go, well, the balance as far as the dragons are concerned, and remember the dragons they're the nuclear weapons really of Westeros. They're the game changers. If you had dragons just taking on a normal army, we saw it in Game of Thrones on the TV show, and I think they showed it very well. A dragon can just wipe out a normal army. So if you have superiority in terms of dragons, then you're ahead. And the balance at the start was that whereas the blacks had more dragons, they had fewer dragon riders. And the dragon riders they had tended to be younger, more inexperienced, and the dragons they had also tended not to be as big and impressive. Vagar, the oldest, the biggest, the most impressive dragon, was on Team Green. So what are they going to do about this? Because they've got a lot of dragons, they decide that they're going to go and recruit new dragon riders. And this is what's called the dragon seeds. So they go out and say, are there any people there who think that they can ride a dragon, who want to give it a go? The implication is maybe these are bastard children of the Targaryens, and lots of people come forward, and only 5 get through. But they have suddenly got this new advantage. They've now got more dragons in the air, so the balance of power kind of shifts a little bit. But then we get, I'll sort of fast forward through the war bit of it, because actually in many ways that's the least interesting moment. What we have is, one by one, a lot of both sides start falling. So Jacaerys dies, the Battle of the Gullet. The High Towers advance from Old Town, a massive army of very, very slow progress, but they will become important later. The army that was up in Harrenhal starts to head south. And Criston Cole wishes to take the battle to the enemy. And he sees that Harrenhal is central. He sees that there's an army there, and he goes out with his army, with Aemond on Vagar, and he tries to take on this army, because they're also obsessed with Prince Daemon Targaryen, who is going to be one of the central characters of this. There are lots of battles, and people in the Riverlands, again and again and again, armies come up against each other, and who suffers the most? The small folk. We have the battle of the fish feed. We have the battle of the butcher's ball. These are hugely devastating battles for both sides, and the armies are basically wiped out. But still, we have this situation where in King's Landing are the Greens, but probably with the superiority in terms of dragons are the Blacks. And the Blacks decide, well, we're going for it now. We're going to take King's Landing. We're going to invade, and they swoop down in King's Landing because the army has left. Criston Cole, Aemond Targaryen have gone. The Blacks see the opportunity. They take King's Landing. And for the next 6 months, Rhaenyra rules in King's Landing. She is queen in King's Landing. That's wiped from the record books. This is a very George R. R. Martin thing. We've already had the queen who never was. And now we have the 6-month queen who is not on the official records as having ever been a queen at all. But she was. She ruled from the Iron Throne for 6 months. So what do they have? The Blacks seem on the verge of victory here. That the biggest threat they have is this huge army from the High Towers, who are massive and important and rich family, heading up from the Reach towards King's Landing, and Prince Daeron is on a dragon to Sarion. So that's an army they have to care about. And they dispatch a couple of the dragon seeds over there to go and intercept them and beat them. Ulf White and Hugh Hammer. Ulf White and Hugh Hammer get to Tumbleton and decide to change sides. They just stop and they don't take them on, and they go, you know what? We're better than this. We deserve more. We're dragon riders now. What are Team Black offering us? Not much, actually. It turns out they're being made sirs and maybe lords, but they have got higher ambitions. Certainly Hugh Hammer had higher ambitions. Ulf White seems to have basically been a bit of a drunkard, but Hugh Hammer seemed to think that he should at the very least be the lord of somewhere like Highgarden, and possibly even king himself if he can claim the throne. So they switch sides. And we have the first Battle of Tumbleton, which is horrendous for the Battle of Templeton, but the army just stops because they're just, what we're going to do now? We've got 2 turncoats, but does the army recognize them? It's very complicated. But the important point is that army, this massive army, which was from 14 Green heading towards King's Landing, stops. Doesn't do anything. But what happens elsewhere? Probably the dramatic high point of this is the battle above the God's Eye Lake. It's the dramatic high point because of the 2 most charismatic figures, one on each side, Prince Daemon Targaryen for Team Black and Aemond Targaryen for Team Green. They meet. They have a fight, dragon against dragon, above the God's Eye, and both dragons and both people die. Basically, they kill each other above the God's Eye, splash down in the lake, and that gets rid of the most important powerful weapons on each side. So we're already getting the narrative here, I think, that who wins the Dance of the Dragons? Actually, it's a matter of everyone loses the Dance of the Dragons. We've seen Targaryen after Targaryen after Targaryen dying, and dragon after dragon after dragon dying. Now, let's go back to King's Landing. I said this would be quite short. Maybe I've expanded a little bit, but we go to King's Landing. Rhaenyra is there. She is ruling. However, she's faced with a huge problem, is that the country has been at war for a year or so. There's not much food going around. People are in a bad way. They're scared. They're wanting to escape. There is lots of disease and pestilence and bad things happening. Added to which, the person that she's put in charge of being Master of Coin, Lord Celtigar, decides he was going to raise taxes on everything. The people riot. And it's not just a little riot, it's a huge riot that takes out the entire city. And the highlight of this is the storming of the Dragon Pit. The Dragon Pit is where the dragons, the 5 remaining dragons, are kept. And they are killed by sheer weight of numbers. Thousands, tens of thousands of people just charging at dragons, and sheer weight of numbers takes them down. At that, finally, Rhaenyra, who at this point thinks that actually all but one of her children is dead, Rhaenyra flees King's Landing. She has to go. So she heads off. While this is happening, we have a second Tumbleton battle going on, and even more dragons and even more dragon seeds die down there. But Rhaenyra finally makes her way back to King's Landing, which was where she started in the first place. And when she gets there, thinking, well, at the very least, I can just sit here in this fortress, sit here and resist attack from everyone. Here can be my safe place after all of this has not gone to plan. She discovers that while she has been looking elsewhere, Dragonstone has fallen. And the King Aegon the Second, who had somehow mysteriously evaded their capture when she took King's Landing, he is actually now ruling there, and he orders her killed. Rhaenyra has gone. Aegon II has won, it would appear. However, King's Landing is descending into rot and ruin. We have what's called the Moon of the Three Kings, where we have 3 pretenders, one on each of the hills in King's Landing, taking control. And Aegon II does eventually win King's Landing. But, as I said earlier, he has been broken by this. He has been hurt and destroyed by this. What was he going to do? He basically threatens to keep the war going. He threatens to just carry on with the bloodshed, and the wiser heads amongst those around him decide, this is the time to end the bloodshed. This is the time to move on. This is the time for healing, and that cannot happen with him at the helm. And he dies. He is poisoned. The end point, really, of the Dance of the Dragons is when finally, from the north, the Starks arrive. Cregan Stark arrives, and whereas everybody else has been fighting themselves to death over the last year or 18 months or whatever, they're completely fresh and looking for a fight. And he arrives to discover the war is over, and we get what's called the Hour of the Wolf, where basically he bosses things. Him and his Stark retainers, they're just completely in charge. They decide who is guilty and innocent of various crimes, and dispense justice and move things forward before just going. And that is pretty much it. The king after Aegon II is Aegon III, who is Rhaenyra's son with Daemon. So he's the person who survives after all of this. So could you say that side won? I suppose you could. But there is a regency, a significant length of regency, I think about 6 years. And that is a 6 years where the realm tries to heal itself. We have regents, we have people who are running the kingdom. The Targaryens, for the first time since they arrived, are not in control. Other people are in control. The regents are in control. So that's the high level Dance of the Dragons. As I say, the takeaway points from all of this are who won. Well, technically we can say who won, but the actual answer is that everybody lost. But this is about the end of the height of power for the Targaryens and the end of the dragons. Some dragons survive the Dance of the Dragons, but not for long. So perhaps we'll pick up on that a little bit later in the stream. Okay, so that's the overview of what we've got in the Dance of the Dragons. It's a turning point in the Targaryen rule. Let's get into a few questions. We'll pick up on most of these different main points, I think, as we're going to go through. Mara Lee, thank you so much for the super chat, saying for all the mods and lovely folks in the chat. Yes, moderators, thank you. You know I really appreciate what you do. Just keeping this space safe. This is my absolute commitment here, is to make sure that the live streams, the chat, the comment section are a safe place for everyone, and the moderators are the people who ensure that. Just striking off anything which is, I encourage healthy debate, but anything which is an ad hominem attack goes. So moderators, thank you. If you are in the chat and you appreciate what they do, then please do show them a little bit of love. They deserve absolutely everything they get. But Mara, thank you so much. I appreciate your support too. And let's go to Ubermelon, saying, hi Robert, really glad to catch you. I've had a question burning to ask you since the last stream, but now I've forgotten it. Oh, sad times. Well, I'm glad you managed to catch me live. If you do remember, just pop it in the chat, and one of the moderators will pick up on it and try and highlight it for me. So, yeah, it's great to see. If this is your first time watching this live, it's a very different experience, and please do get involved in the chat. There's some fantastic people there. Matt Savino saying, do you believe we'll see the Isle of Faces, and what do you think was Adam's reasoning for going there? Okay, so this is, I think, asking about what we'll see on the TV show. So Adam Velaryon was one of the dragon seeds. He was almost certainly Corlys Velaryon's bastard son, and he was loyal to the end. This is what it says on his gravestone, loyal. But the interesting thing about him is, it's almost a throwaway remark in Fire and Blood. It's not a throwaway remark, because George R. Martin will have known that everyone will have picked up on it. But it said that what he did before he did his last decisive action, which was to go to Tumbleton and take on the betrayers, those two, Ulf White and Hugh Hammer, the people who'd turned Coates from Team Black to Team Green. Before he goes to take on them, he went to the Isle of Faces. And it said that he met the Green Men, and then he went away again. But we don't have a record of what happened. So why is this important? It's important because if you're thinking with the lens of A Song of Ice and Fire, the main story here, the Isle of Faces is central there. George R. R. Martin has admitted as much. He said it several times. It gets mentioned a few times in book 1 in A Game of Thrones as to mentioning how important it is, and then it all goes quiet and the mentions kind of go away. And that's because he moved from doing the idea of a trilogy to a much longer series of books, so he couldn't keep up. Given the fact that this was something which was only going to come back at the very end of the story, he couldn't keep on talking about it as hugely important all the way through, so he ramped down the number of mentions. This is probably the center of the Weirwood network, and that is why it is important, because if we're wanting to know what the Children of the Forest are up to, what the Weirwood network is up to, the place for the answers is the Isle of Faces. Adam Velaryon goes there. How can he go there when nobody else goes there? Well, what we're told about the defense systems for the Isle of Faces was that this was to do with nature keeping things away. If you tried to sail there, then winds would blow you away. If you got a bit further, then you'd find mysteriously a whole load of birds would start to fly at you and you had to turn away, or the currents and eddies in that lake were strange to keep everything away from this isle. But if you're on a dragon, you can just fly over and drop down. So this was what seems to have been what happened here. Is it just curiosity? We don't know. We're not told at all. That's the frustrating thing. What was his reason for going there? One can only assume to seek knowledge and guidance. Why Adam Velaryon should suddenly, who comes from the Valyrian, on his father's side, anyone of Valyrian ancestry, should think to go and get some kind of advice from the Weirwoods, we're not told. But it does open up the intriguing possibility that his mother's side, we don't know so much about her, although she did grow a thriving business at some point, where we're told down in the docks of Hull. Was she connected in some way to the Weirwood network? We don't know. So what was his reason for going there? We're not told. One can only assume knowledge. Just I've always wanted to go there doesn't seem to work, given that they were in the middle of a civil war and he himself was on the run. That seems like an odd place to go. Will we see it, as your sort of main question, will we see it on the TV show? I think on this one we'll probably see it happen, but we won't be shown what happened there. I think they will show us a dragon flying down. I think they'll show us a dragon flying back up again, but we won't get into the POV of Adam Velaryon after that point, so we won't know exactly what he encountered while he was there. Robert Cosina saying, hello, fellow Robert. Hello to you. Huge thanks for your job. Well, thank you very much indeed. Sarah Awesome Sauce saying, can't stay for the full stream as I'm booked for a campaign game of Clank Legacy this evening. I don't know Clank Legacy, but wanted to pop in to show support and some love to my favourite Song of Ice and Fire, Lord of the Rings creator. Well, thank you very much. Enjoy Clank Legacy, and please feel free, somebody, to tell me what Clank Legacy is. It sounds great. Pierre Davis, which event had a more disastrous effect in the long run for not only the kingdom but the entire world of Ice and Fire? Dance of the Dragons or the Blackfire Rebellion? The Dance of the Dragons is the short answer there. It depends when you say disastrous effect for the kingdom, but the Dance of the Dragons changed the course of history in the long run. It led to the dragons themselves dying out, and the dragons themselves dying out led in the long run to the end of the Targaryen rule, because if the Mad King had dragons, you can be pretty sure that Robert Baratheon would have got fried well before he ever got to the Battle of the Trident. That's just not an issue. The fact that the Targaryens did not have dragons for the last period of their time ruling was hugely important. The Blackfire Rebellions, which happened a bit later, this will be Fire and Blood Part 2, I suspect we'll talk a lot about the Blackfire Rebellions. They were important. They did divide the nation in two. They led, for some houses, they led to fortunes going up or down. But did it actually change anything? Well, no. We had a Blackfire Rebellion, which lost. We had a second Blackfire Rebellion, which lost. A third one, which lost, and so on. It was lots of attempts to claim the throne for a particular line of the Targaryens, and none of them worked. So, which had the greater impact? The Dance of the Dragons, I would argue, by quite a long way. Question from Uber Melon saying, past the forgotten question onto reflective rambling for the end of the stream, but just wanted to remind everyone to take any meds, drink some water, and have a stretch. You are all loved. Yeah, look after yourselves, guys. I know there are lots of people who drink cups of tea during this stream. Whatever works for you, but yeah, look after yourselves, people. Thank you very much for that, Uber Melon. And Sarah Awesome Sauce is saying, Clank is a super fun. Oh, here we go. Public service announcement, everyone. I was wanting this. Thank you very much, Sarah. Clank is a super fun tabletop game, and it has a legacy campaign version you can play with friends. Worth another super chat to tell you about the game. Well, there you go, guys. This is a free shout out for Clank. What was its full name? Let's see if I can go this. Clank Legacy. I will check it out. Andrew Kay saying, agree, most of the Blackfire Rebellions were duds, especially the later ones, and rarely did a major house back the Blackfires. Yeah, so the Blackfire Rebellions, they had, particularly, you get the second Blackfire Rebellion, it's covered in a Dunk and Egg story, and basically it didn't happen. They gathered the people together and said, hey, should we have another rebellion? And then Bloodraven came and squashed it before they even had a chance to have a full conversation about it. So that was the second one. The later ones, the War of the Ninepenny Kings, that didn't even make it to mainland Westeros. The Blackfire rebellions were important, but they weren't critical to the meta history of Westeros, would be what I would say. Let's go to a question from Kartik Prabhu. Thank you very much for the super chat before we went live. I don't think I've said this one yet. Saying cheers to your awesome content and the wonderful community here. Also cheers to Dan. Dan is my dog, the greyhound. He's asleep, as he is. That is now his habit, I think, during these live streams. He's reached 5, so which is a very old age, nearly middle-aged for a dog, and he does like his naps now. Diego Godoy saying, hola, Robert, hola. My question is a hypothetical one. Early in the dance, did Rhaenyra name one of her children as a successor to her? Like, had the Blacks won the dance in a short timescale? Do we know which branch she would have preferred as her heir? She had 2 branches, as it were. because she had two husbands. The first was Laenor and the second was Daemon, and she had three children with each of them. Jacaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey with Laenor, and Aegon, Viserys, and Visenya with Daemon. Now, the three I say with Laenor, they probably weren't, almost certainly weren't actually with Laenor. He was the father, and they were legitimate children according to the law, but almost certainly they were Harwin Strong's children with her. The other three, Aegon, Viserys, and Visenya. Visenya died in childbirth. Aegon and Viserys did both become king in time. Aegon there is Aegon the Third. But in terms of who her named heir was Jacaerys. And Jacaerys was her named heir until his death, when Lucerys had died by this point, and Joffrey then becomes the named heir. Joffrey dies in a... he was still a boy at the time. I can't remember exactly how old he was, but 6, 7, something like that. And he dies in a vainglorious and rather tragic attempt to stop the storming of the dragon pit. He climbs on his dragon and just goes and tries to help out, but he's a boy. He's a child. He couldn't. The forces of unnumbered humans were against him, and he died there. After that, we're not told about her, what Rhaenyra's thoughts were in terms of who should succeed her, but we certainly have... Viserys had disappeared. No one knows what happened to him. So the kind of thinking has to be, well, Aegon is the heir. So it goes in the order of that they were born in, because their first 5 were all boys. So whether it's a boy or a girl does not matter in this instance. The order that they were born in, because both marriages were legal, so there was no issues of legitimacy. Crannog Woman, I think I saw you in the chat earlier, actually. Crannog Woman, great to see you, saying, "Hi Robert, I still don't understand what was going on between Daemon and Nettles. I mean, I get that they were lovers, but oftentimes Daemon seems to do things to get more power, like marrying the heir to the throne, etc. Was it simply love, or what was his motivation?" Okay, this is a really interesting one. So Daemon is the central character in the early parts of this story. Season 1 of House of the Dragon expect to see Daemon Targaryen as being the person who is the greatest protagonist, pushing events along. Some of them we will see, some of them we'll only guess that he was involved, but he is the person pushing. And you're right, I agree 100%, Crannog Woman. The default action for Daemon is what gets me closer to the throne. First of all, he thought he could be king himself. Second, there were so many people between him and the throne in terms of line of succession. He seems to have defaulted back into well, how do I get closer to the throne personally, even if I'm not personally king? Hence, he marries Rhaenyra, which means that after her 3 children from her first marriage die, his children are heirs, things like that. But he ends it, as you say, in a very different way. He does seem to have been changed. He seems to... So with Nettles is one of the dragon seeds, and she and he grow close. This much is incontrovertible. The two of them head out. Their role was to head out into the Riverlands and just sort of go out and cause trouble there, and hopefully try to bring Aemond out into the open so that they can fight him. The two of them grow close. Nobody doubts that. The assumption is that they become lovers. That this is probable. And Miseria, Lady Misery, who was Damon's lover, is the one who tells Rhaenyra that that's what's going on. There's a hint there of why is she turning on her ex-lover? Is she jealous? Maybe he has now found true love because he was very much in love with Miseria much, much, much earlier. Is she now jealous? That's a hint that we have in the story, because Lady Misery was telling Rhaenyra that her husband was cheating on her, and not just cheating on her, but also there were feelings involved. Rhaenyra, it would appear, was kind of turned a blind eye to his cheating ways, but whether she could to him actually loving someone else was a very different matter. So what was going on there? Well, the first answer is maybe, yeah, he did just fall in love. It's possible. It's not told, where actually Damon recedes away from the center of the narrative the deeper into the dance we get. Having been the center of everything at the beginning, he's still important and charismatic, but he's less central the further into this story we get. And it's almost as if his desire has gone, his drive has gone, his need to personally be closer and closer to the throne has gone. One thing I think is worth analyzing in this, when you start thinking about what his mental state was at the end, we don't have much dialogue to go on from Fire and Blood. So the bits of dialogue we do have, we should probably pay attention to. And when they meet, these two, Aemond and Daemon, Aemond says, "You have lived too long, Daemon. You've lived too long." And Daemon replies, "On that, we agree." So it's almost as if Daemon has reached a point where he's not suicidal, but he's more at peace with himself. He's not being driven to do a thing. He realizes maybe his time has finally come. And that is underlined by what happened next, because we always focus on how cool it is, these two dragons fighting above the God's Eye Lake. But George R. R. Martin invites us to pay attention to some, I would say, bizarre details. They're important details. It appears that you have, although we didn't see it because Dany doesn't know how to ride a dragon properly, we didn't see it in A Song of Ice and Fire yet. Dragon riders tend to attach themselves to the back of dragons, not just by clinging on for dear life, but they have saddles and then they chain themselves onto the dragon. So they are attached to the dragon. And we're told that Aemond spent the time chaining himself in properly, attaching himself to his dragon. But Daemon decided against that. Why? Because clearly he was already planning what happened next. The fight above the God's Eye is basically, they get up, there's a few little opening sorties, and then Daemon on Caraxes just like heads up and goes off out of the sight of Vhagar and Aemond. And they're looking around, where's he gone? What's happening? And then suddenly Daemon just shoots down out of the sun, attacks Vhagar. Caraxes clamps jaws around that dragon, and everyone hurtles down towards the lake. This is not just a do or die move on Daemon's part. This is basically a mutually assured suicide. I'm going to kill you, but I will probably also die. And I said about the chains was important. He, during this move, jumps off of his dragon, which he would not be able to do if he had been chained up. Jumps off of his dragon and jumps, sword in hand, comes down and attacks Aemond and kills Aemond. And that is the end for him. And that seems to have been his plan from the beginning with that battle. That's why he didn't use the chains to attach himself to the dragon. He seemed to have decided, you know what? I'm done. Why? Well, the Nettles thing does seem to have changed him. They were very probably lovers. The possibility, I think I've got a question on this a bit later, so I won't go into too much. There is the possibility that maybe she was his daughter, and maybe actually the connection there was not so much a romantic one, but him coming to terms with his past and who he is, and fatherhood. It's possible. So you're not quite understanding what was going on there is deliberate. George R. R. Martin leaves it vague, but he definitely tells us that Damon had reached a different point in his life where he was happy to end it all. He seems to have reached some kind of personal fulfillment. And Nettles, what happens with Nettles, seems to have been the trigger for that. Was it because he'd found true love? Perhaps. Was it because he'd found a child of his, and he'd realized what was really important in life? I don't know. Either way we go with this, it does, when you read between the lines, kind of imply that George R. R. Martin's being a bit of a softie here, and this great charismatic horrible character gets a degree of it's not a redemption arc, but he reaches a better place at the end in himself than he had at any point in his journey leading up to that. Pierre Davis, if Aegon II kept up with the denial of the throne, do you think he would have been assassinated due to his grandfather, Lord Hightower? So would he have been assassinated? So I think the angle I would come at this is Aegon II, when we're nearly at the end of the Dance of the Dragons, he takes the throne. And his idea is very clear. This war is not over. I am going to go and get bloody vengeance on anyone who opposed me. Anyone who was on the other side, I'm going to deal with them. That was what prompted his assassination. And the assassination almost certainly was from the plotting of the cooler, what we might call it, the cooler, wiser heads, but the people around him who wanted the war to be over. Corlys Velaryon, Larys Strong, and possibly also Tywin Lannister, although he wasn't in King's Landing at all at that moment. They are the people who did not want him to carry on. And so I think if he had been the person he was, with the desires that he had to carry on the bloodshed, he was always going to be assassinated. That's my general take on it. Let's go to a question from Johnny Targs, saying, hello, Robert. Did the Greens ever attempt to try and bring Corlys Velaryon over to their side at all? I don't remember reading about any attempts in Fire and Blood. A shout out to you and your moderators for the great work. Well, moderators, another shout out to you. Corlys Velaryon is a fascinating character in all of this. He was, I've said this before, but it's worth saying again, he was at the time of the beginning of this story a living legend, well into his 70s. Traveled further than anyone else, the richest man in all of Westeros, the greatest adventurer ever, a legend, married to the queen who never was. As we enter the story, the grandfather to the heir to the throne. This guy has done it all. His story is interesting because he starts off on Team Black and very clearly wants them to win, because this is the side he thinks, after many attempts to get his side of the family onto the throne, suddenly he's faced with another coup attempt against them, and he wants them to win. But Rhaenyra finally turns against him, because she gets into her mind that the dragon seeds, because 2 of the dragon seeds turned. And incidentally, somebody asked me last week if I could talk a bit about the dragon seeds. I think I'll be doing that, and I will carry on doing this. So hopefully you will accept that as an answer to your question from last week. But the dragon seeds his children, basically. And when Rhaenyra says no, they need to be killed, it's like, I'm not having that. So she actually throws him into the dungeon. And as a result, Driftmark, House Velaryon, goes on strike. They never switch sides, so to speak. But Corlys does stay in King's Landing and with Larys Strong and Tywin Lannister try to build the future. And what that means sometimes is you have to side with one person, sometimes you have to side with another. It's anyone who seems to offer the best chance at ending this war. Did the Greens ever earlier on in the story try to get him onto their side? Well, no, because his grandson was the heir to the throne. According to Team Black, what on earth would he have to, would Team Green have to offer him? Less than that is the answer. Pierre David's saying, when Aegon denies it at first until his mum's lie, I'm not sure entirely what you're talking about there. Apologies, but yeah, if I figure that one out, I will pick it up next week if that's okay. Bear Island saying, hello Robert, this is questions from my patrons, at which point I should probably, as I always do, just say patrons. Thank you. I can't do what I do without your support. My Patreon page is the best place if you want to support this channel. If you want to support what In Deep Geek does and stands for, then please, the best place to support the channel is over on Patreon. Thank you very much. There's a link down in the description. Is there anything else I want to plug? Always forget these things. Let's go for a random one. If you are watching this live and would find it easier to watch it live on Twitch, or just want to go over to Twitch and give me a follow, this is being simul streamed over on Twitch, so please do go and check that out. I'm answering the questions in the YouTube comment section rather than over on Twitch. Maybe I will sort of switch it up in future, but that's where I'm at. But if you would find it easier to watch on Twitch, then please do. That's why I've simul streamed over there as well. Bear Island. Hello, Robert. Hope you and Dan are well. We are, thank you. At the end of the dance, Torren Manderley became both regent and Hand of the King, only to be insulted and dismissed when Aegon III came of age, heading back to White Harbour and taking Mushroom with him. Does the rise or fall of House Manderley at the time let us glean anything about the future of House Manderley in the Winds of Winter? Well, interesting question. So House Manderley are, for those who are sort of unaware, because on the Game of Thrones TV show they weren't really represented, they are the second most powerful and rich family in the North. They are very important. And unlike most North families, they are culturally more like the Southerners, because they worship the Seven, they follow the kind of the chivalric knightly virtues, things like that. So they're not followers of the old gods, they're followers of the gods of the Andals. In the Song of Ice and Fire, we have Wyman Manderley, who is Lord too fat to sit a horse, who is echoed, it has to be said, a little bit by the character we have in Torren Manderley in Fire and Blood, in the Dance of the Dragons, and will, I'm sure, make an appearance in House of the Dragon, in that he's also quite corpulent, very politically engaged, and also, and this I think is the crucial point that George R. R. Martin wants us to take away, very, very loyal. He made his promises. He made his vow to support Rhaenyra. He's sticking to that. And he, out of everyone, incidentally, probably has the claim to have stuck with her and her claim for longer than anyone else, in an undiluted sense. When she's taken King's Landing, and then eventually she has to escape King's Landing, and she goes out friendless. Basically, it's just like this small band of people around her, and she's trying desperately to get back to Dragonstone. When she gets to Dragonstone, she'll discover that even that's turned against her. But the people who take her to Dragonstone, who take her home, are the Manderleys. They are loyal to the very end. The Manderleys weren't at all involved in what happened at Dragonstone. They just went on up to White Harbour afterwards. But that, I think, is what George R. R. Martin wants us to know about the Manderleys. They are loyal. And this will be important in A Song of Ice and Fire because they are at the heart of the Great Northern Conspiracy. They are at the heart of the rejection of the Boltons being Lords of the North and trying to reinstate the Starks back into Winterfell. So that is a very important plot point in A Song of Ice and Fire, and George R. R. Martin is planting the seeds of that by pointing out how loyal House Manderley are to the promises that they have made. 444 saying, what events or characters, this is sort of building on the last question really, what events or characters do you think will rhyme in A Song of Ice and Fire from the Dance of the Dragons era? I am 99% convinced that Rhaenyra's rule in King's Landing will rhyme with Aegon VI's story, and Dragon's flight over the lake in the story of Euron and Undead Jon. But what else? Winterwolves, Dragon Seeds, ? So my take is that we will have Rhaenyra's reign in King's Landing, which is half a year, and somebody who once was very beautiful and loved by the kingdom comes in the middle of a civil war and raises taxes and is basically turns on the small folk and has to, or is run out of the city. I think that will be echoed in Cersei's story. I think we see the start of this in the very last chapter, the epilogue to A Dance with Dragons. So the last chapter we have, this is Kevin Lannister's perspective. We can read so much into that about what the plot is going to be for King's Landing in the first part of the next book, because you immediately we get Kevin who is understanding what is going on, so we see it through his eyes. That's why he's killed by Varys, because he understands what's going on and he's making the sensible and right decisions. The clear implication is whoever takes over from him will not be making the clear and right decisions. He looks around and sees the people are starving, and it is suggested to him that because they don't have much money, because the Iron Throne is broke, which again they were in Rhaenyra's time, he should raise taxes, and he basically says no. The people will revolt. Cersei thinks, yeah, we should raise taxes. Cersei is going to be the person in control in the first half of the Winds of Winter. She will raise taxes. This is a time of war, and she will, I suspect, through that and the other atrocities which she will commit, she will get run out of town because there is a better alternative elsewhere. The better alternative in the time of Rhaenyra was pretty much anyone, and they had 3 people coming in and ruling when she went. But I think that's where that echo is going to go. The dragons fighting over the lake, I agree absolutely. Euron and Jon will, there will be an echo of that happening there. The Winter Wolves, there may well be an echo. I could certainly see Winterfell sending troops down to King's Landing at the very end of all of this and claiming absolute control. Bran Stark becoming king is certainly something that we're now expecting to happen as likely at the very end of it. That would feel to many people like a Stark takeover. Dragon Seeds, bastard children and others riding dragons. I think I've got a question on this coming up, but yes, this isn't just going to be obvious Targaryens. This isn't just going to be Dany riding dragons. Others will do it too. Pierre Davis saying, sorry, all right, this is picking up actually on the thing I didn't quite understand. I was asking if Aegon II kept up with the denial of the throne when he was approached at first, and then his mum lies about them being beheaded. Would he have been assassinated by the Hand? No, I don't think so. Personally, it's the Aegon II is a special case because, regardless of how you look at it, he was a Targaryen who was in line to the throne. Now, that's not to say that he was first in line. The Greens would, or sorry, the Blacks would say he was not first in line, but they would not deny that he is in the line of succession. So it actually would take something very special to get rid of him, and it is the very special thing is him at the end basically saying, I want the war to carry on, and everyone else being, no, we're just not having it. So that's my thinking of it. I think no. Yeah, I think no. Okay, let's go to a question from 444 saying, who is the father of Nettles? Corlys, Daemon, Laenor of Aemond. Is she a dragon tamer because of Valyrian heritage, or just a smart girl who figured out that dragons are admittedly magical creatures but still animals? So this is a fascinating one, because Nettles we're not told huge amounts about. Nettles does not look like a Targaryen in a way that is very obvious. There are some who don't look very Targaryen-y, but Nettles, her skin color is very different. Her upbringing, she comes from the docks on Driftmark. That certainly doesn't appear very Valyrian. What she does is a different approach to getting the dragon, not just walking up to it and trying to ride it, but more likely to think about taming an animal, feeding it sheep day after a day, building up trust, slowly getting to the point where you can approach. Once you approach, slowly getting to the point where you can touch and handle, slowly getting to the point where you can get up and ride this. So that, yes, she's definitely the clever person who can do this. If she had not done any of that and just walked up to the dragon, all the indications are she would have had the same fate as everyone else who tried that. She would probably have been burned. So there is definitely an element here of her being clever and figuring stuff out. But is she from Targaryen heritage? There's no reason to think that she isn't. She comes from Driftmark, and that's certainly where Corlys Velaryon was around, and it's very heavily hinted that Adam and Ellen Velaryon, they became Velaryon, they started out as Hull, they were his bastard children. So clearly he, and they were from Hull, from Driftmark, clearly he was not averse to having a few affairs out there. So maybe she was his. That's possible. The idea that it was Daemon was the father is also quite intriguing. We talked about this a little bit from the other perspective a moment ago. This is a gap in his timeline when he is in exile from King's Landing, and he goes back to sort of ruling in the Stepstones, and it all goes a bit quiet for a while, and he ends up in Driftmark, and certainly his only real ally at the time was Driftmark, House Velaryon. It was Corlys and him who'd first of all done the invading of the Stepstones. So he probably would have been back and forth to Driftmark. So it's possible in terms of timeline. The idea that it was Laenor, I think we can be reasonably sure that he was gay, and so almost certainly this wasn't his child. Does this tell us anything about who can ride a dragon a bit, but probably not anything that we hadn't already figured out. So Daenerys Targaryen, although she looks Targaryen, is at best 1/8 actual Targaryen when you go back through her family tree. And probably less than that. She is not a pure ancestor of the Valyrians. There was a lot of intermarrying between her and them. So you don't have to be 100% Valyrian in order to ride a dragon. It would probably help, but if you have got some of that in you, then that's probably all you need. Why is this important? Because this immediately opens up the idea that other people might be riding dragons. And that, I think, was what George R. R. Martin was trying to do, at least partly here, was to introduce this idea that not just Targaryens or occasionally Velaryons can fly dragons. It could be other people. Jon does not look like a Targaryen. That's a link across already to Nettles. Nettles did not look like a Targaryen. Jon does not look like a Targaryen. I think Jon will ride a dragon. So perhaps this is a little bit of slightly tangential foreshadowing for that. Let's go with another question. Actually, it was a third question for 444, saying, many years ago, I saw a comment from George R. R. Martin that he wanted to create a villain on the level of Breaking Bad's Walter White. Is Daemon Targaryen this character? Hero and a villain at the same time. Handsome and charismatic warrior like Jaime, smart and ruthless like Tyrion or Tywin, impulsive and heroic like Jon. Well, I dug up this quote because this is I was intrigued about the timescales on this. So the quote is, and this was on his Not a blog. The quote is, he starts by saying, "Great episode of Breaking Bad last night." He was clearly a fan, and then he says, "Walter White is a bigger monster than anyone in Westeros." Open brackets, I need to do something about that. Close brackets. Now, is that just a throwaway line? Possibly. But the timing is intriguing because he wrote that in 2013. The Rogue Prince, which is the novella that first introduces Daemon Targaryen, happens in 2014, so a year later. So, and Daemon is not even mentioned in A Song of Ice and Fire. Quick tip to Learned Hands pod for establishing that one on Twitter. Yesterday, I think it was, reminded me of that fact. He's not mentioned at all in the books for Song of Ice and Fire. George R. R. Martin appears to have made him up somewhere around that period. So is this him trying to create that character? Possibly. It's equally possible that this was simply a response to the Rogue Prince. Originally appeared in a collection, I think they were called Rogues or something like that, which was a collection of short stories from heavyweights of fantasy literature. And George R. R. Martin created this character and sort of basically his fake history and submitted that as part of that collection. So maybe it was just effectively a response to a commission. I like the idea that this is at least part of the genesis. Not that Walter White is the same character as Daemon Targaryen in any way, shape, or form, but what if you've not seen Breaking Bad, I'm not going to do any spoilers here, big spoilers anyway, but Walter White is a sympathetic character. We're invited to understand him and be on his side, and yet there are certain points within that story where you stop and you take a step back and go, well, hang on a moment. Actually, what you've just done is horrific. And I might understand and I might sympathize and I might be cheering you on, but at the same time, I have to recognize that you are a monster for what you've just done. That, as an idea, does play well also into the character of Daemon Targaryen, who does many horrific and horrendous things. But hopefully on the TV show, they will manage to capture the fact that he should be charismatic. He should be likable. He's not just a baddie. He should be somebody that we actually want to explore the world with. Let's go to a question from Alejandro Martinez saying, "Hello, Robert. Not sure if my question is at all relevant. It is. Thank you. But it seems like little and less is said about the Iron Islands and Dawn during the dance. What were the Dornish and Ironborn up to during this time?" Well, it is relevant because what they were up to is a part of the story of the Dance of the Dragons. And what Dawn were up to were just sitting it out. And that is important because they could have got involved. Now, they sort of got involved in the build-up a little bit. They were one of the people who allied against Daemon when he was taking over the Stepstones. But when the actual dance itself happened, they were not a part of the Seven Kingdoms at the time. So it wasn't their civil war. So they just sat back. And that is important in and of itself. The Ironborn is a fascinating subject because they had a very Ironborny leader. I hope you know what I mean by that. It's somebody who was sticking to the old ways and loved the raiding and reaver life at the time, and the Red Kraken he was known as, and both sides tried to woo him onto their side. Otto Hightower basically tried to bribe him and said, "Come and join us. If you do, then you can be master of ships on the small council, and here's a few other things that you can have. Please join us." The Ironborn did not respond to that, did not agree to that. What Rhaenyra did, what the Blacks did, was actually slightly cleverer. They said, "We're not wanting you to join our side. We're not wanting to tie you down. We're not wanting to say that you're working for us. But if you happened to be raiding the west coast of Westeros for the foreseeable future, attacking people that are on the other side, like the Lannisters, like the Hightowers, we'd be okay with that. And you definitely wouldn't. There wouldn't be any repercussions later when we become king. So, if you want to go and do that, that's absolutely fine." And that is the offer that they took up. And so most of the action from them during the Dance of the Dragons is not central to what's happening, but it is attacking and attacking and attacking the west coast of Westeros and sapping the energy and strength and resolve of particularly the Lannisters, but also to a degree the Hightowers. Their attention was turned westwards and northwards to the Iron Islands rather than to what was happening in the actual dance. Let's go to a question from Sam Day. "Hey, Robert, my question today is, were there any underrated characters or houses in the dance, people and families that had a large impact but aren't remembered in the histories? Thanks to you and the moderators." Well, yeah, many. The problem is that the only way that we read about this is through the in-world histories. So we only see the characters that the in-world histories wants us to see. That said, I think the one character who clearly, according to their own testimony, was central to absolutely everything was Mushroom. If you take Mushroom at his word, then he was there for every important encounter, every important discussion, every important indecency. He was there. So he would claim that he is the most underrated character, and we still haven't had a casting, so there's a fair chance, I think, that in season 1 we won't have Mushroom. Sad times. I will do a little shout out though for Tyland Lannister. Not because he's not mentioned in the histories. He is quite a lot, but I think he's often not given the credit that he is due. He was one of the cleverest players of this game. The first main point that he does is one of the most important, which is when the Greens seized power, he took all of the money that the Iron Throne had and he distributed it around the world. Some went to the High Towers, some went to Casterly Rock, some went to the Iron Bank of Bravos, and some stayed where it was to pay the ongoing small bills. But the fact that that got sent off in different places meant that when Rhaenyra arrived, when Rhaenyra took over King's Landing, there was no money left, and she had to find ways to raise money, and the ways that she found to raise money made the small folk hate her, and that led to her eventual end. So actually, Tywin Lannister, just on that small moment there, was one of the most important people making one of the most important strategic decisions of the entire war. But then you kind of fast forward on towards the end, and he sticks around. There's a bit, I don't know whether we'll get that far, but after the war, he is Hand of the King, and or Master of Queen even, and spends his time just doing what I think we'd probably now call a sort of a Keynesian macroeconomic expansion attempt to boost the economy. And it seems to work. When I say that, what I mean is that he's spending government money on public works. Let's repair the Dragon Pit. Let's build a whole load of ships. Do we need these things done? No, there's not many dragons left. We don't need to be doing that. Do we need all the ships? Well, no, we're not at war. But people were employed. A sense of looking forward was engendered throughout the realm. It was absolutely important what he did. Salvaged what hope there was from the end of the Dance of the Dragons and meant that they didn't go into sort of a death spiral after that. Okay, let's go to Lauren saying, "Hello, Robert. First time asking a question. Welcome. Great to have your question, despite the fact I watch your channel faithfully every week. Thank you. Do you think we will, the series will show behind the scenes work that the Citadel was doing to undermine magic and the dragons, in addition to the final climax, that is the Dragon Pit? I think we're going to see less of the Maesters and their plot than we would hope. It's my honest assessment. The take that I have is that the Maesters, you can argue that they played a role in helping to start the war, but in terms of getting rid of the dragons that died during the war were not in the control of the Maesters. This was not anything to do with them. I think that their plan stepped up once they realized that the dragons were almost gone. Once it was back down to a manageable number. This isn't 20-something dragons we've got flying around now. It's 4, and 3 of them are hidden off in places we can't get at them. There's therefore only 1 we have to worry about, plus all of these dragon eggs, and dragon eggs aren't going to breathe fire on us. So that's the point, I think, when they made the decision. I don't think we're going to see that here. I would love to see a show about the regency of Aegon III. I think it's the last couple of chapters of Fire and Blood, and one of the best sets of chapters. I really loved that. That would be when we would see the Maesters in action trying to destroy the dragons. Okay, let's go to a question from Persephone. Hello, Robert, moderators, and Dan, the most handsome greyhound on the internet. I hope you had a really good day. I did, thank you. Thank you for all that you guys do. How did the Targaryens know which babies to put dragon eggs in their cribs with them? Did the babies have to be royal babies or just part of the Targaryen family? As a Targaryen, do they have the best chance of being dragon riders? If you have your own dragon and your dragon had a clutch of eggs, are those eggs yours because the dragon is yours? So a lot of questions about how this works. So I'll sort of roll all of this up, if that's okay. We're not told the details, is the boring answer. But it appears that dragon eggs were distributed, that it's not always 100% clear which dragon lays which eggs, and we're very rarely told who got which dragons, the eggs from which dragon. So it seems not to have been a huge part of the process of deciding these things. Who got them? It was never fully laid out, but members of the Targaryen family, you asked whether it's like royal babies or parts of the Targaryen family. It's the core. It depends on how many dragon eggs they had, it would appear. And if you were a potential dragon rider, somebody they would like to be riding a dragon, a Targaryen, a member of the royal family, then you would get an egg in your cradle. Now, the problem, and this is going to be important for the plot in House of the Dragon. It's a sort of a throwaway section in Fire and Blood, but I think they're going to make more from what we've seen in the trailer. I think they're going to make more of this in the TV show. That Daemon, who was undoubtedly a Targaryen, he had a child, or his mistress, Lady Miseria, was pregnant with his child, and he grabbed for himself a dragon egg, intending for that to go to the child. But Viserys, the king, said, no, this is an insult to the family. So there seems to be a line somewhere. We're not told exactly where this line is. There appears to be a line. If you are bastard born, then no, you're not getting an egg. Because we do not want bastard-born children riding dragons. Only if you're a true part of the Targaryen family will you get it. And I think at this point, a distinction between the Targaryen family and the royal family is pretty much moot. They're all, yes, there were lots of them at that point, but it was small enough that they were all royalty. Alana saying, hello, Robert and the fine people in the chat. I'm curious as to what moment of the dance you're hoping to get answers on that was left vague in Fire and Blood with the excuse of accounts differ and the like. Or are you hoping that the show will skirt the line of leaving things ambiguous in such cases? Well, a bit of both is the answer to this question, I think. There are some things I'm actually very okay with the show leaving a bit vague. For example, Rhaenyra's first three children, were they with Laenor? Were they with Breakbones? Well, from what we've read, very probably not Rhaenor, and Laenor, and very probably they were Harwins. But it's never actually, we're never invited into the bedchamber to discover that that was the case. We're just told all of the facts, the way that the children looked, the fact that Laenor and Rhaenyra spent hardly any time together, that kind of thing. I'd like that, though, but to remain a bit of a mystery, because the point of that is that there were opposing views on it. And I think the moment that you interject into that story what the correct answer is, you lose a little bit of the uncertainty of the narrative, because that suddenly makes somebody right and somebody wrong. And the whole point here is that there were lots of people who had competing views, some of which were based on their understanding of the facts. And if you make the facts clear and known to everyone, then that just eliminates it all. But what is it that I'm looking forward to in terms of things being clarified? I would love to know what happened between Rhaenyra and Kristen. I think I know, but I would love to have that confirmed. And I'm also hoping that we get confirmation of a few of the things that Daemon did. For example, the fire at Harrenhal. The fire at Harrenhal killed the Lord of House Hightower and also Harwin Strong. which is important because it meant that Rhaenyra's lover was dead, so Daemon could marry her. Also, it brought Larys Strong to being Lord of Harrenhal. Was it Daemon who did that? Probably, but we don't know. I would like to know for certain that Daemon was involved in some of these many things that we hear that he was involved with, so that this isn't just hearsay about him. There are some things that we could say, yes, he actually is like that, not just that there are rumors that he's like that. Okay, let's go to a question from Zakalok. Who was Daemon's eyes and ears at the Green Council? If it was the Clubfoot, why did he help Aegon II and his family escape? This is an interesting question. So, if you read Fire and Blood with an analytical eye, there are a few sentences which stand out. One of these is that Daemon had allies at court as well, even on the Green Council. So this is established that Daemon had allies on the Green Council. On the other side, he had some allies. Who might these be? Well, I can very easily, and this is a bit of like a kind of a whodunit, let's just see whether we can eliminate some people from this, because we know who was on the Green Council. There was Alicent and Otto Hightower. I think we can pretty clearly rule them out. They're not going to be secretly on Daemon's side. Otto hated Daemon. Alicent, this was about getting her son onto the Iron Throne. It's not going to be then. Ditto Criston Cole. Criston Cole was Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. He hated Rhaenyra, as far as we can tell. He was not going to be the person who was helping her get to the throne. Quite the opposite. Lyman Beesbury may have been because he was the only person who stood up for the Blacks at the Green Council. But clearly the implication here is, first of all, friends implies more than one, so he may well be one of them, but there must be at least one more. And secondly, he died. So saying that he had eyes and ears at the Green Council does seem to imply that they were there and they didn't just die, so he didn't know what was going on. So if we rule out him, we are left with Grand Maester Orwyle, Tyland Lannister, who we talked about a moment ago, and Larys Strong, the Clubfoot. Who out of those three might be on Daemon's side secretly? Well, Tyland Lannister, I think we can rule out, because Tyland Lannister, when the Blacks took over King's Landing, they tortured him to within seconds of the end of his life. He was hugely disfigured by this, and to the extent that when later on he came back into a position of power and authority as Hand of the King, he literally put a sack over his head so that people couldn't see his face and be horrified by it. So he stood up for the Greens all the way through, and I think for that reason we can probably rule him out as Daemon's spy, which leaves Grand Maester Orwyle and Larys Strong, at least one of which was Daemon's friend in the Green Council. Now, Orwyle is an interesting figure who basically seems to be not wishing to commit to anything and sort of hiding away where he can, just muttering platitudes where he can. He basically, I think he sees what's about to happen and he just wants to curl up into a ball and not have anything to do with it. Larys Strong, his exact motivations are never revealed. Yes, he saved Aegon II when the Blacks came, but the hint is that he was playing both sides, that he was wanting to make sure that he was in a position of power, no matter what happened, that he could retain that power. So yes, perhaps he Well, he actually did. He rescued Aegon II, so he could claim to be on the side of Team Black. But if it looked at the point at which Aegon was, or just before he took the decisive action of revealing himself and killing Rhaenyra, then he could still have handed him in. So Larys seems to genuinely have been playing both sides against each other. So if I had to guess, probably Larys Strong, as well as Lord Beesbury, but maybe Orwell. Zachalok saying, can you break down the Battle of Templeton and the Templeton even and the 2 dragon seeds treason and why it was a crucial moment in the dance? Well, I did a little bit at the beginning, so I won't go over it too much again now, but the importance was the fact that it meant that the Blacks no longer had an overwhelming majority of the dragons, and she turned against the other dragon seeds because of what they did, which meant that Adam Velaryon, although he was staying loyal, he had to escape and couldn't do what she was wanting him to do. Nettles similarly managed to escape, and Daemon was definitely on side with that as well. So why was this important? Because it lost her all of the dragon seeds, and it lost her Daemon, and it lost her Corlys Velaryon. Her decisions there on the basis of what happened at the First Battle of Templeton meant that she lost her allies. She lost the most important weapons that she had. Rocket Moose saying, hi Robert, one thing that really stands out to me is that Valyrian features are associated with dragon riding, but Rhaenyra and Laenor's children seem to be only dragon riders. The only dragon riders without typical Valyrian appearance, except maybe Nettles. What does this tell us about the heritability of dragon riding? Yeah, so I think this is building up on what I said a moment ago. George R. R. Martin is very clearly showing that you do not have to look like a Valyrian in order to be riding a dragon, which is fine. I think we kind of guessed that already. It means that it opens it up for Jon to be riding a dragon at the very least. The children, Rhaenyra's children with theoretically Laenor, even so, were still half Valyrian. Even though they might not look it, they were coming from her. She was still the mother, so yes, they were half Valyrian. Jamie McKenna saying, hi Sir Robert, will we see some of the legendary and missing Valyrian steel swords in House of the Dragon? Also, given the opportunity, would you ride a dragon? I would. I'm not great with heights, I have to say, but I don't think I could turn down that opportunity. But in terms of Valyrian steel swords, yes, we will see some. First of all, we should name check Blackfyre and Dark Sister. Blackfyre will be in the hands of the king, which was passed down to Aegon II. Dark Sister, pretty much all the way through this, will be held by Daemon Targaryen. These are lost by the time of A Song of Ice and Fire and will probably become important a little bit later. But here they are there in their glory. The Valyrian steel swords that belong to House Targaryen. We also have Ice, which makes a brief entrance at the very end when we get Cregan Stark comes all the way down and brings Ice with him and starts executing prisoners. And then we get a few slightly more obscure that some people may not have heard of. Lamentation, which was held by House Royce. That was lost during the storming of the Dragon Pit. Orphan Maker, which was with House Roxton, but then ends up with Lord Peake, who plays a big role in the Regency later. And then we also get our last mention of Vigilance, which is House Hightower's Valyrian steel sword. This could, at least theoretically, make an appearance in A Song of Ice and Fire. So I don't think that was gone. I think the clear implication is that Lamentation has been lost completely in whatever happened there. Orphan Maker, I doubt we'll see, but Vigilance, yes, we definitely will. Let's go to a question from Amara Lee saying, hi there, Amara, saying, in honor of, this is actually a super chat you did before we went live. Thank you very much. Saying, in honor of all the royal women of House Targaryen, just a show of love and support for all the marvelous content, merch, and the fabulous stories on the well-told tale. Yes, if you don't know, I have a second channel. There will be a link somewhere down in the description. I read audiobooks, the best science fiction and fantasy stories ever written. How many seasons, and thank you also for your super sticker, by the way, how many seasons do you think there will be of the TV show in general? And how many seasons and episodes do you think will cover the events leading up to the dance? Well, season 1, I think, will cover the build-up to the Dance of the Dragons. So I think we'll have a full 10-episode season of that. As for after that, we don't know. We've not had any confirmation. It's still not officially been confirmed for season 2 yet. It's 99% certain to be commissioned for season 2, but they haven't officially confirmed it yet. How many seasons? I think 5. They haven't told us, but 5 kind of works for me. Just breaking down how the story might evolve. There isn't, we should say, huge amounts of material here, and there's a lot more material about this, what we're seeing in season 1, the build up to the dance, compared to some of the battles, which may sound big and impressive and important, are done in a couple of pages. So George R. R. Martin doesn't care so much about that, but that does mean that we don't have all of the details about how some of the battles took place. Reflective Rambling saying, new working theory. In Deep Geek is not a lord or maester or even a mama. He is the warder to a brown Aja, keepers of knowledge, traveller, historian, and protector of compassion. Well, thank you very much. That's a Wheel of Time reference. That's a very kind thing to say. Andrew K agreeing 5 or 6 seasons seems like the sweet spot here with the length of the source material, even with adding on and filling in. Yes, so they will need to fill in. I've said there's not huge amounts of source material. They do need to fill in. So this isn't going to be just an adaptation of what we've read. They do have to add in a few extra bits. So far, that doesn't mean it would appear new characters or anything. It just means where there are gaps in the narrative with scenes, which hopefully will build on what we already know and have. And Mara also asking how I think the showrunners will end the series. Where in the book would the last season end? Well, I've sort of ummed and ahed about this a lot, but I think that the best answer, as far as I'm concerned, is it has to be after the end of the dance itself. You can't leave a civil war hanging, and I don't think you can leave it with Aegon II on the throne. I think he has to be poisoned first, because that's the point at which the continent starts to heal. That's the point at which they appoint people who they think will be able to guide the 7 kingdoms forward. So that's the sort of the boring answer. In terms of how they might end, there is a line of dialogue. We don't get, as I say, we don't get many lines of dialogue. We do get a line of dialogue from Cregan Stark, who simply says, "The snows are falling in the north, and my place is at Winterfell." He turns around. He heads back up north again, having come in and completely bossed the last section of the war. He just turns around and goes back up again, and that seems like a fantastic way to end this. It's just like the Starks, having come at the very last minute, done all of the amazing things, just turn around and go back again. I think that seems like a great place to finish, as far as I'm concerned. I've got one more question from one of my patrons, so now is a good time, if you've got any further questions in the chat, a good time to drop them in there. Lady Pushkin saying, sorry, Robert, totally off subject. fine. At the end of the stream, I'm happy to go off subject. Monty Don was on the Chelsea Flower Show tonight. For those who don't know, Monty Don is a gardening expert who's often on the BBC, and talking about the World Wide Wood and how trees communicate underground via roots and fungi. Blew my mind a little bit and obviously made me think about the Weirwood's communications system. Yes, so I have seen this theory before. I think it's not just like a random person coming up. This is proper scientific theory. It was in Nature magazine that forests and woods seem to be able to communicate one tree with another. There are some that we know about, I think, in North America. I'm not sure whether it's the redwoods, but some trees like that, they certainly can communicate. And apparently this is in a lot of other trees. When you get a forest with its own ecosystem, then what happens on one side of the forest affects how things are growing and moving in the other side of the forest. Reflective Rambling saying, Ubermelon's question, why is Tywin considered an amazing commander? To my knowledge, he hasn't won any battles where he didn't vastly outnumber them or just slaughter innocents. I don't think he's not viewed as like the great commander. I think it's probably fair to say. So Randall Tarley was viewed as being the greatest general. Stannis was generally viewed as being very capable and competent. What Tywin was viewed as was being ruthless. So what happened with House Rain was about him being ruthless. Now in in the Song of Ice and Fire, when he arrives last minute and saves when Battle of the Black Water is happening, King's Landing is under attack, that is him not winning it by being a great commander, but he's winning it by turning on people, by signing up with alliances against people. That's how he operates. So I don't think it's him being a great commander, although he seems competent enough. He seems a pretty competent commander. It's not about the fact that, well, this person is more brilliant than anyone else on the field of battle. It's the fact that he's more ruthless. Lady Pushkin saying, exactly, he was saying, this is talking about the worldwide wood theory. He was saying, don't use fungicides as it interferes with the communication system. There you go. Andrew Kay saying, I missed a super chat. Oh, apologies. From Chaos Ballerina. Was the shepherd working on orders of the faith, or had he gone rogue like Melisandre? Okay, so the person who instigated this riot was the riot which led to the storming of the Dragon Pit, was this guy called the Shepherd, who is this rabble-rousing preacher in the Faith of the Seven, who appears just a few days beforehand. Nobody really knew where he came from, raised everybody up into a huge fury, and then pointed at the Dragon Pit and said, go, kill the dragons, they're abominations. So is he working on some particular agenda? I see no reason why. Certainly he gets captured and killed, and there's nothing there to hints that he's anything other than genuine to what we're told that he is. This kind of leader does emerge throughout A Song of Ice and Fire in lots of different places and ways. So I don't think that there's much of a hint of that he's some sort of a tool or puppet for someone bigger. That's not to say that that the faith didn't subtly push him over in that direction. That would certainly make sense, but I don't think that he was deliberately like there, having been told, here's your secret mission, go and do it. It's a slightly more nuanced approach than that. Let's go with a question from Cloaked One. Just wanted to show some appreciation for your speech near the end of the last stream. Eagerly seek out love. Really needed to hear that take amongst all the hate going on. Also shouting out reflective ramblings art for that. Yeah, well, thank you for that. For those who missed it, yeah, towards the end of my stream last week, I went off on a kind of unscheduled rant. I'm not sure that's probably the wrong word, and whether one can rant in defense of love, care, and kindness, I don't know either. But anyway, I did it, and some people said some nice things about it, and to direct attention to a very worthy place, Reflective Rambling, who's one of the wonderful group of moderators we have here, put some of those words into a lovely piece of art, which you can find over on Twitter. You find, I think I retweeted it, so probably the easiest way is to look for In Deep Geek on Twitter, and you will find that there, and you'll be able to get a Reflective Ramblings account that way. So thank you, Cloaked One. I think it's the key here is that we're talking about TV shows and things and books that we love, and we're committed absolutely 100% to keep this corner of whichever fandom we're a part of a positive, a loving, a caring community where everyone is welcome. So that's the heart of it. But thank you very much. Reflective Rambling, picking up a question for Avalon, God of Fire. Thank you. I love it when you do that. Very kind of you. Glad I could hang out with you all today. How long do you think the Targaryens could have survived when their dragons died off if Aerys didn't screw it all up so badly? It wasn't just so much Aerys. I think the thing is that they ran out of allies as much as anything else. Yes, Aerys mucked it up badly, but they ran out of allies because they ran out of Targaryens. Now, what you will find, if you want another suspicious Targaryen character, obviously, when in doubt, blame Bloodraven. And there's a period when, after the Dance of the Dragons, the Targaryens went down to a very small number, and they started to expand out again to quite a large group. And during that period, the Targaryens in the line of succession, including Blackfyres, died at a rate of about one a year, not just for a little while, but for over 20 years. Now, that is very suspicious, particularly when you realize some of these died choking on a lamprey pie and things like that. It does look very suspicious, as if the family tree is being pruned. And sure enough, from having well over 20 Targaryens, we actually get down to the point when we have Aerys II, that's actually what's the family? What's the Targaryen family? Well, there's him, and there's his children, and there's his wife, and that is it. There's no one else out around there. So how long could they have survived if they hadn't gone through that pruning, and if they had built up strong alliances, and if Rhaegar had perhaps managed to oust Aerys? Probably a while longer. They were still a very strong house. It's just that their list of alliances had grown thin. Chaos Ballerina, semi on topic questions. David Dynamo, do you think there could possibly be a dance of sorts with the Starks, who will be the players in the Dance 2.0? Is this where one of the three treasons happens? So a dance is Targaryens fighting against themselves. Will there be that? Well, there will definitely be a Targaryen succession crisis. There will be Dany against Aegon VI, Fagon. Will it be another dance? Not to the same scale, because the first dance had 20 plus dragons flying around, whereas with Dany we've only got the 3. But will we get dragon versus dragon flying in the skies attacking each other? Yes, I think we will get that. But I think that will be Euron who's riding that other dragon, for reasons that are long and complicated, and so I won't go in here. It's a bit of a digression. But I think the short answer is it's not going to be another dance, but it will be a good old-fashioned Targaryen succession crisis. Cloaked One picking up. Thank you very much for Gentle Ben 86 saying, "Hi Robert, I was wondering what your thoughts. Pardon me. I was wondering what your thoughts were on House Tully's Muppet names in Fire and Blood and House of the Dragon, and how House of the Dragon will treat them." Yes, so George R. R. Martin often does little homages to or nods to writers' books, things that he likes. Now, some of these are quite obscure. There's one with Sir Patrick at the Wall, which is an American football reference that still doesn't quite, I still don't quite understand it entirely, but I've been assured that it is one to do with 1-1. And there are also very clear references across to some of his favorite writers. Mervyn Peake, for example, has House Peake, and there's a lot of references across there. But he also does comedy acts that he likes. There is if you look at the 3 sellswords who go with Lady Stoneheart and Tyrion and Bronn over to the Eyrie, you'll see that their names are basically Larry, Curly, and Moe, which is an old American comedy trio. And here in Fire and Blood, he calls House Tully, the main members of House Tully, names after Sesame Street characters, after Muppets. Kermit Tully is definitely there. Grover Tully. It's how will they treat them? I think just with a straight face. I think that they're not going to do a nod and a wink to the camera and say, "Hey, these are funny characters." The good point is that although they will get mentioned earlier on, they only really come into importance at the very end, at which point they're being called the lads as a sort of a wider grouping. So I think they will keep the references to a minimum, but when they do, just do it as with a straight face. What do I think about it? I think George R. R. Martin's allowed to name his characters however he wants to name his characters, and I've personally got no problem with him if he wishes to acknowledge some things that he loves. Fair play to him, I would say, as long as they don't draw people out from the story while they're reading it. And for me, it didn't. But your mileage may vary. Reflective Rambling asking, what characters are you looking forward to seeing in the series? Absolutely, Laris Strong. He's a character I would love. Nazaria, I'm really looking forward to seeing. Mushroom, obviously. It's the slightly more mysterious characters who you don't know whose side that they're on that I get fascinated by. But very much also Daemon. I think he is one of George's favorite characters, and he should be one of ours, even though we might hate him. So that performance by Matt Smith will be crucial. I'm sure he's going to nail it, but I'm just really looking forward to experiencing this character that George R. R. Martin thinks is mercurial. Andrew K saying, could be wrong, but in typical Hightower fashion, despite a vested interest in the outcome, it seemed to me that they somewhat held forces back, given their total resources. Well, yes, they did sort of. It took them an awful long time. They had a big army, which they marched out from Old Town very slowly, and they stopped a lot of times and they fought a few battles, but they never quite got there. This was the big threat for quite a while to Rhaenyra. While Rhaenyra was there on the Iron Throne, the big threat that she saw was this army, this Hightower army, moving forwards from Old Town. But it does move very slowly. I mean, George R. R. Martin never really says that, but it is a bit weird. And it's worth noting, Otto Hightower was not Lord Hightower. He was the brother and then later uncle of the Lord of the Hightowers. So yes, they are loyal. There are the familial links there, but this isn't like he's there commanding what the Hightowers do. His relative is commanding what the Hightowers do, and he's commanding events in King's Landing. Okay, I think with that, I'm going to start drawing this one to a close. What we've got next week, we're going to go back to the Lord of the Rings. A character who's a fantastic character who is their center stage in the stories we know and love with Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, but also way back in the Second Age as well, and that is Elrond. Who actually is he? What's he want? What's his agenda? How does he interact both with the Rings of Power when that comes out, but also what was his role in the Lord of the Rings? Trying to dig underneath the surface a little bit. So that's what we're going. I'm hoping to get another guest on for that. I'm loving introducing you to some other creators within the world of the Lord of the Rings. So keep an eye out for that. As for other things to look forward to, I've got another video coming out soon for the Lord of the Rings that, from a certain character's perspective, people seem to really enjoy. So I've got one from Gandalf's perspective. What was it like from his perspective? What did he know? When? How did that affect what he was doing? That kind of thing. So if you're interested in that, keep an eye out. But there's also plenty of Game of Thrones and the Song of Ice and Fire content coming out soon as well. But with that, I will say that if you're watching back a little later, there's going to be a link appearing here to my other live streams. There will be a link appearing here-ish to my Patreon. But that's it for this week. Take care, everyone, and I will see you again soon.